It's Wednesday and time for another 10 minutes of truth. So I have a couple of great articles I want to go over, scientific articles that I think are very, very pertinent and very important to our society and our culture, and more importantly to our health. The first one was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, January 16th, 2024. And the name of this article is Rapid Single Particle Chemical Imaging of Nanoplastics by SRS Microscopy. The second article is an article out of Nature Medicine, which is one of the most prestigious journals in the world. This article was published April 2025, so April of this year, pretty recent. And it's bioaccumulation of microplastics in decadent human brains. So the first thing that I want to talk about is these two articles stress the fact that human beings and animals, but these articles are more specifically related to humans, are accumulating large quantities of microplastics and nanoplastics in their organs and their brains. And it's having very, very negative biological effects. So the first article I want to go over is the one from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And it talks about the difference between nanoplastics and microplastics. Now, microplastics are plastics that are the size of 1/1,000,000th of a meter. And those plastics, some of that can be actually viewed by the human eye, can be seen by the human eye, but can definitely be viewed under a microscope. Nanoplastics are 1/1000,000th of a meter. They're much, much smaller and need to be viewed by an electron microscope. Nanoplastics are considered much more toxic because their smaller size renders them much more amenable or easy to enter the human body. Micro and nanoplastic concentrations are estimated to be around 250,000 particles, plastic particles per liter of bottled water. And that's especially true in those crinkly plastic water containers that people drink out of. You should totally avoid those. Those slough off hundreds of thousands of micro and nanoplastics in every container of water. These tiny particles, these nanoplastics, were previously invisible under conventional imaging, and they actually dominate the number and account for about 90% of the plastic particles detected in these water bottles. Mounting evidence or discovery suggests that fragmentation of plastic polymers does not stop at the micron levels, but continues to form these nanoplastics, which are much, much higher in quantities. Given the capabilities of these nanoplastic particles to cross the biological barrier, meaning blood-brain barrier, nanoparticles, despite the seemingly trivial contribution to the mass measurement, really plays a much more predominant role in their toxicity. Now, one of the things that I want to emphasize from this well, it actually wasn't from this article, but this is something that's out there in the scientific literature. It says the number of studies indicate that the discarded masks used during COVID restrictions are a significant contributor to the global burden of micro and nanoplastics. And I just wonder, for people wearing those masks, and we all did to a certain extent, how much of that we breathed into our body. I don't know. But I know that the breakdown is contributing substantially to the amount of micro and nanoplastics in our culture and globally. And these masks, these discarded masks are not good for the environment or good for people for that matter. Now, the next article I want to talk about is one out of Nature Medicine called Bioaccumulation of Microplastics in Decadent Human Brains. The authors obtained post-mortem human liver, kidney, and brain samples and assessed quantities of environmental microplastics and nanoplastics in these organs. In controlled cell cultures in labs and animal exposure studies, microplastics and nanoplastics exacerbate disease or drive toxic outcomes. Studies in using various technologies confirm the presence of micro and nanoplastics in human kidney, liver, and brain. And they consist primarily of polyethylene, with lesser but significant concentrations of other polymers. Brain tissue harbors higher proportions of polyethylene compared to the composition of plastics in liver, kidney. And this is verified by an electron microscope, which present largely as shard-like fragments in the brain. Ever greater accumulation of these micro and nanoplastics was observed in a cohort or a group of brains, human brains, that were acquired from people that died that had dementia. And there were noticeable depositions of nanoplastics in the cerebrovascular walls and the immune cells of the brain. Recent studies associated with nanoplastic presence in carotid atheromas with increased inflammation and risk of future adverse cardiovascular events. So it can affect heart function and cardiovascular function as well. Brain nanoplastic concentrations were significantly higher than liver and kidney. Brain samples, all derived from the frontal cortex, which is this part of the brain right here, exhibited substantially higher concentrations of nanoplastics than the kidney or the liver. Now, one of the things that was interesting is they looked at liver and brain samples from 2016 and 2024. And here's what they found: that the liver and brain samples from the 2024 had significantly higher concentrations of nanoplastics than the 2016 samples. Total plastic concentration in dementia samples were higher than in any normal frontal cortex cohort, which means that the amount of nanoplastics they found in people with dementia much, much higher in the brain than in a normal brain. Total mass concentration of plastics in the brains analyzed in this study increased by approximately 50% in the past 8 years. They said, they quoted, "We postulate that the exponentially increasing environmental concentration of micro and nanoplastics may analogously increase internal maximal concentrations." Micro nanoplastic concentrations in normal decadent brain samples, normal deceased brain samples, were 7 to 30 times greater than the concentration seen in the liver or kidneys. And brain samples from dementia cases exhibit an even greater nanoplastic presence. So from 2016 to 2024, the median concentration of micro and nanoplastics increased by about 50% from 3,345 micrograms per gram to 4,917 micrograms per gram, roughly 3 bottle caps worth of plastic. So the goal of this study, or what we should learn from these studies, is that we really need to watch our consumption of food and beverages out of plastic containers. Now, I generally don't drink water out of plastic, hardly ever. At our house, we don't buy water in plastic bottles. We don't store it in plastic bottles. And we try, and the food is different. It's a lot harder to get away from storing food in plastic. But on the other hand, when you refrigerate food under plastic, I think there's probably less shedding into the food, and I'm not totally sure of that. But the fact of the matter is do not drink water out of plastic bottles. Avoid it, period. And do what you can to avoid any consumption of nanoplastics and microplastics, of drinking and eating out of plastic containers. Because these two studies show that the nanoplastics, which is way more than the microplastics, accumulate in the brain. They create inflammation, and they can lead to dementia and later on Alzheimer's. So that's all I have for today. I hope this helps you. Hope this keeps you away from consuming things out of plastic if possible. And it's pretty scary studies, pretty sobering studies, but at least you need to be aware of it, and you need to be aware of anything you can do to help yourself. So this is Dr. Paul Firnhaber at Lincoln Disc and Nutrition here in Lincoln, Nebraska, 402-488-2220. If you have any issues or questions regarding your health, please call us. We'd love to talk to you. I'll see you next week for another edition of 10 Minutes of Truth.